folks, welcome to the Homestead Wife Skill of the Month Club. We are still doing month 1. The topic is planning and preparedness. And what we're trying to do here is to share ideas and strategies around this homesteading or homemaking skill, and also inviting all of you to kind of put your food in the pot here in terms of putting your ideas in the comments below so that we can all share our wisdom and skills regarding planning and preparedness. I'm sure that unless you're completely new to this, you've seen a few talks, you've seen a few tutorials, and you know that I also do chats with my neighbor, Johanna. Hi, Johanna. So if you haven't seen one of our chats before, I'll just remind you that she lives near me and also lives off the grid. We have a lot of values in common, but we have some life circumstances that are a little different, so we're able to offer a different perspective so that the conversation between us can hopefully be resonant with different people at different times. So that's what these chats are all about. So today we're going to talk about tips for tight times. Now, why does this belong in planning and preparedness?
Yeah, why?
Well, I want to share with you, Nick and I went through a process of getting ourselves out of debt. We both had student loan debt from our undergraduate degrees. We don't have graduate degrees, but we do have bachelor's degrees. And we had a significant amount of student loan debt. And at that point, I was a stay-at-home mom, but Nick was working at a pretty good job. So we had kind of a choice between having a comfortable lifestyle or having a really kind of strict lifestyle and paying down the debt. Well, we managed to pay down that debt in 3 years, but we lived as poor as we've ever lived. And it was intentional and it felt powerful, but it also was hard. So that's why I think this is a part of planning and preparedness, because sometimes you have to be able to accept tight times in order to get the outcome that you're looking for.
The end goal.
So Johanna and I are going to share with you what we do, some of the things that we do when things are tight, when things are scarce, how we survive and thrive in times like that.
Sounds good.
All right, so what have you got for us, Johanna? You start us off.
So, needs versus wants. Needs versus wants is a big deal. So, a want is things that you don't necessarily have to have. And needs are those things that you do need. And kind of prioritizing those is kind of a big deal. And knowing exactly what's needed and what's wanted.
Right. So anytime that you've got to cut corners, you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you splurged on something and then you don't have the thing you really need for your comfort or even your survival. So there's a little bit of maturity to that. Maybe it's not the most fun part, but it definitely is a skill worth cultivating.
It totally is. At one point in our life, a need was Netflix.
Right? Sure, you guys can all relate to that, right?
I mean, we were all on a budget. We were trying to cut everything out, and we were like, oh no, this is $9 that's totally staying in the budget.
Right?
And it was silly, but it was sanity, and it was entertainment, and it was budgeting in something fun that we could do all together that really wasn't that expensive. There's not a lot you can do as a family of 7 that's cheaper than $9 a month.
Right. And I'm just going to put words to what Johanna just said. Build in your treats. When you're budgeting, when you're looking at what you need to survive, make sure that you are keeping something that has pleasure value to it. Sometimes pleasure can come from the cheaper thing rather than the more expensive thing. And you can take your eye off of the newest iPhone in return for the Netflix or some other really affordable treat. But you have to be proactive about that, about saying, this is what I'm going to need to be a happy, healthy person. This is what I'm going to need to thrive.
Yep.
What else?
So another thing is storing some food.
So we've talked about this in the last couple videos, storing food.
Yeah, you can live cheaper if you're able to buy in bulk and you're able to pull things off the shelf instead of spending that gas money to go to the grocery store. So go ahead and watch that video. Esther will put in the link at the bottom.
Yep, I will.
Another thing is when you have that food storage, don't be afraid to add rice on the side, or rice inside, or beans on the side, or beans inside. You can stretch an amazing amount of meal by just adding rice or beans.
And it's true that you get used to it. When I was in Nicaragua, the people that I stayed with there, wonderful people that I stayed with, they had beans and rice literally 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. It was very unusual to have anything other than beans and rice. And these are not miserable people. These are not unhappy people. So it's funny when you say to your children who are accustomed to a different set of foods, you know, this is what I expect you to eat. You have to navigate that transition, certainly.
Yes.
But my husband and I have beans and rice about 3 times a week, and it isn't necessarily the only thing on the plate. I mean, actually, for us, we're fortunate it's never the only thing on the plate. But it's perfectly possible to be happy on beans and rice. You know, you can just change your attitude about it and make it work.
Yep. So another thing I have is less meat. So meat is expensive any way you look at it. Whether you buy it from the store, whether you buy it in bulk, whether you grow it yourself.
Yeah.
There's lots of things to consider. It had to be fed, it had to be watered, it had to be transported, it had to, all these things have to happen and come together to make this perfect meat that goes on your plate. And it's expensive. And if it's a big part of your meal, it's a big part of your budget.
And that's another matter of just changing what you're accustomed to. Sometimes the transition can be difficult, but I found a lot of health benefits and also satisfaction with having meat as a not every meal kind of treat. No, treat is the wrong word, but something that is in terms of my family's diet, it's an important element, but in terms of quantity, it is much less than some other things.
Very true. She's shared on other videos that living out here, it's really hard to grow all of your food on a vegan lifestyle. It's just hard. That getting that amount and the bounty of beautiful greens takes a lot of space. It takes a lot of space.
And you have to use fossil fuels in order to get your movable mirrors to cast the light where you need it to be. You know,
So true.
Most people who have survived in our climate range have had meat as a part of their diet. I don't think that I would certainly say to anyone that you have to have meat or that you have to have little meat. But as we're talking about ways to thrive in those tight times, really considering how meat functions in your diet, I think is a good place to start.
So another thing I have is share and barter. So there's some things that you are good at where other people are not. And they are totally willing to take what you have and share what they have because they don't want to do that other thing.
It's true.
They just don't.
It's true. And we love sharing. You know, sharing has gotten kind of a bad name as far as feeling like you need to have your own thing. But I feel like it brings people together and it can actually be a good human connection to share things with other families. I really think it has benefits other than a frugal lifestyle, although it certainly does do that.
Yeah. So going to the thrift store. Thrift stores are kind of a gold mine sometimes. And especially, so I have a friend who is really good at doing a 6-month running list. So she goes all the way to the next season in her running list as she goes to the thrift store. So one of the things that I bought are these cute little tiny boots for my 2-year-old. And I was able to get them for $2.99 in August. August there was no snow and it was super hot. But I was able to get her these snow boots that work totally now, and they would have cost me 5 times as much at least, or I wouldn't have been able to find them on the shelves.
Right. So I'm going to give you my strategy for thrift stores because I really think it's a matter of willpower. It's almost a mind game, right? You have to go into the thrift store and get what you needed as opposed to what they were trying to sell you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, haven't you all had that time when you went into the thrift store and you came out with the 6 things that you didn't really need, right? Okay, maybe that's just me. Maybe that's not you.
No.
But I do think that some kind of accountability as far as what's going to fit with your lifestyle, because it really is a puzzle moment, right? You have certain open spaces in your life, and then there's kind of these random things at the thrift store, and you're trying to make real good connections. So I actually really agree with Joanna's friend who makes the 6-month list. Our list isn't necessarily 6 months, but I do keep a list, a wish list. We call it our junkyard wish list. And so it's this kind of what Nick is using when he's looking at Craigslist, and it's what I'm using when I go to a thrift store. And I think that you have to have some kind of willpower and accountability to kind of hold your own version of necessary, or you can come out of the thrift store with a basket full of things you didn't come for.
Very true. So another thing on my list is used is perfectly good. So I'm going to share one of Nick's stories. So in their brush clearing video, he bought this chop saw, and it's dedicated for exact lengths on making sure that they have the right length of wood to go in their wood stove. It makes it super easy. He was able to buy it at a very nice price. So he was able to have a dedicated tool for something that he truly needed.
Mm-hmm. It's also, sometimes there's greater value in used items that are quite old. Sometimes things that were made in a prior generation were made with greater quality and greater care. So it's maybe buying a used plastic toy, it seems like a very poor decision. But buying something, used cast iron, for example, is a really great use of money, because those old cast iron pans are high quality. And someone who's selling it may or may not know that when they set the price.
Very true. Mm-hmm. Very true. And kind of know the prices as you go in, because some people know the price and some people don't. So sometimes you can go into a store and be like, ooh, that's a really good thing. And you figure out that it's like marked up way a lot from what you should have bought it for. So just be careful.
I'm going to add another tip in here about purchasing and looking at that wish list. I usually put my wishes or wants on at least a 1 week hold. And the reason for that is that when you have an urge or you have a need for something, sometimes you haven't explored all the possibilities in terms of living without it. And obviously, your 2-year-old needs boots. I mean, we're not going to not give our kids boots. There are some things for which this doesn't work. But I think that there are things that I have learned to live without, that my life is actually simpler and more comfortable without. One example for this is if I let myself run out of Ziploc bags. This is a really kind of simple old story for me, but I had been throwing away bread bags. At that point, I was buying bread. I'd been throwing away bread bags and buying Ziplocs. And I kind of never noticed that was happening until I ran out of Ziplocs one day and I put it on a 1 week hold, just because that had become my habit in a very frugal time. This is back when I was living in Boston and we're trying to get out of debt. And I thought, oh my goodness, why do I not just use the bread bags that I'm throwing in the trash? It seems so clear. But if I hadn't put myself on that hold, I may not have been able to realize that my life was better off without that item.
Very true. So, following a budget. If you actually write down your purchases and follow and track what you're doing, it makes sense. It just does. You can see where those things are kind of heaping up at the end. They're like, wow, I spent that much at McDonald's? At one point in our lives, yes. Now, we don't so much. But at one point in our lives, it was. Or fast food, or anything like that. But you notice what you're spending and what you're spending it on, and therefore you can categorize that money into different areas and help in other areas where you were really tight.
Right. So she just said budget, but let's come back to budget in a second, because my tip, that's basically what Johanna just said, is shame-free record keeping. There's nothing that'll change your budget more than writing down everything you spend and not shaming yourself over it. It's really tempting. I've never had a big McDonald's budget, but there was a point that I was buying, a $4 or $5 coffee drink way more often than I want to admit. And when you look at that at the end of the month, you look at how many dollars you've spent on these basically sugar and caffeine drinks. It's very tempting to beat yourself up over the head, but just to give yourself a moment to say, I'm not going to be ashamed of this. I'm just going to look at it. I'm going to say to myself, maybe I want to make an adjustment here.
And maybe you don't.
Right.
Maybe you don't. Maybe that is what you need to stay sane, and that is okay. That is totally okay. it is okay if you need that so you can get to the next point in your day. Keep it there. Put it in the budget.
So, explanation, we just let the...
We are wearing different things, aren't
We're wearing different things and we're in a different room. We accidentally let the phone die. I guess that's probably the right way to say it. It wasn't plugged in, and it cut off just a few final closing thoughts. So even though right now it's a different day, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this talk on tips for tight times. So we had just a few more things to add.
So you were going to talk about budgeting and treats.
Oh, yeah, and I think we covered this a little bit last week, too, when we talked about storing food that you like. It's been an important tactic for my family, living on less, to budget in some things that we like in order to prevent a splurge that's unplanned to try and get things that we like. And I want to be clear that this isn't really about not having discipline. You know, I have a ton of discipline. I can do what I need to do. But to be able to have a happy life really saves money. Really having happy kids and good moments really saves money, because then you don't find yourself needing or feeling desperate for things to entertain you or to make you feel better.
So making moments.
Oh, this is me too. Making moments when you don't have stuff. This is a Carla Emery trick. This is something that I learned from my mother, and I'm not sure that she ever put it into words. But she was good at being a master of ceremonies for the family and creating moments that made people feel like we were rich even when we weren't rich. You know, we actually used to sing, "We got a barrel of money, maybe we're ragged and funny." But, you know, it's that kind of feeling of there are riches in time, and time spent together, and time spent doing what you love, and that's a valuable thing. Just remembering that there's value in that can't be measured in dollars has also been literally a financial savings for my family. Okay, now it's got to be you. It's got to
Okay, totally. So, making moments. Finding the happy in just the regular moments in the day. Mm-hmm. Today I did a lot of snow blowing, and I would wave at the kids when they were looking at the window, and I'd smile, and I'd do the "I love you" sign. Mm-hmm. You just find the happy when you're covered in sopping wet.
We're so buried right now. As we're shooting this, there's so much snow.
Another thing is paying some type of tithe. Mm-hmm. If you're able to give in some way, you feel so much better and so much richer than if you're scraping every penny and going, mine, 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 for my situation. It really helps.
There's a principle of abundance there for sure. If you are able to give, you feel more in charge and more calm about what you have. And I'll tell the story on Johanna that, especially when she first came up here, we couldn't go to each other's houses without bringing something. It was kind of silly, actually. We wanted so much to be able to give each other things, and we still do. I mean, we're still like that. But it's a good, healthy thing, I think. And especially if you are off grid and you know that it's hard to get to town and you are making things from scratch, being able to share right out of your canned goods if you have them, or money if you've got money, you know, whatever it is that you can share.
Or time.
Yeah, it really does. It's a little bit hard to believe, but it really does help you to balance the budget. Good point.
It does. Mm-hmm. And then remembering that there's a God and praying for those things that you need. When we add that into the equation and we actually say those kinds of words, it really does bring, it helps you come to a point where maybe your priorities are a little off, or just helping you know that there's something there.
Hope. I mean, I think with all of these things that we're adding on, kind of tacking on to the end of the other session, might all have to do with just your interior life and your experience of enough or abundance. I mean, I guess those are kind of big words, but if you think about how advertising works, I don't necessarily mean individuals. If anybody out there works in advertising, I don't hate you. But when we think about just this whole concept of putting a commercial out which will sell a product, they're all targeted on your bad feelings. They're targeted on your insecurity, your feelings of need, that you aren't enough, that you aren't cool enough, that you aren't loved enough, that you aren't safe. I mean, all of these things are kind of cracks in the armor. Well, if your armor doesn't have very many cracks in it, that stuff just brushes right off. And so I think that when we talk about prayer, when we talk about abundance, when we talk about making moments, all of those things are kind of part and parcel with this idea of nourish your spiritual side, your internal health, and believe it or not, it's going to make a difference at the end of the month.
It will.
So that's another chat for the Skill of the Month Club. I'm Esther Emery, and this is Johanna Fugal. We've been talking to you about tips and tricks for tough times, and I hope that somebody out there has found something of use.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time. Take a breath. That was a long sentence.
It was.